My mother-in-law forced me to divorce because I couldn't have children. Amy, a talented and beautiful young woman who used to work in journalism, married Jack, the only son of Mrs. Linda, a strict and traditional woman. Jack's family was not wealthy, but Mrs. Linda had raised her son to become an honest, hardworking, and loyal man. Before getting married, Amy and Jack were deeply in love and both desired a happy home full of children's laughter. After getting married, Amy and Jack lived together in Jack's small family home. Amy not only took care of her family but also strived to advance her career while helping Mrs. Linda with household chores. However, after several years of marriage, Amy could not get pregnant. They tried various treatment methods, from modern medicine to traditional medicine, but all were unsuccessful. Amy's mood became increasingly heavy and anxious, fearing that she could not bring complete happiness to her family. Throughout this process, Mrs. Linda observed Amy and gradually became dissatisfied with the young woman. Mrs. Linda began to criticize Amy for not being good enough in taking care of the family and seemed to lose faith in Amy's ability to become a mother. Although Mrs. Linda did not say it outright, her suspicious glances and unintentional remarks hurt and frightened Amy. Jack tried to mediate, comforting his wife and explaining to his mother, but Mrs. Linda seemed to become more adamant in her views. Amy's anxiety about not being able to have children grew, and she began to feel trapped and unsure of what to do to remedy the situation. She spent a lot of time thinking about this issue and tried to show more affection and care for Mrs. Linda, hoping that she would understand and empathize with Amy's circumstances. Meanwhile, Jack also didn't know how to resolve the situation. He felt helpless as he couldn't support his wife and didn't know how to persuade his mother to accept their circumstances. Jack often wanted to talk to his mother but didn't know where to start. He even thought that he could be the cause of the problem. The lives of Amy and Jack's family became increasingly tense and difficult. Arguments and conflicts became more frequent, especially between Amy and Mrs. Linda. One day, after a heated argument, Mrs. Linda decided to demand that Amy and Jack get a divorce. Amy could not understand the reason and felt humiliated and heartbroken. Jack also could not comprehend his mother's intentions and did not want to divorce Amy. They fought fiercely, but eventually accepted Mrs. Linda's wishes, as they did not know what else to do to resolve the situation. Amy and Jack stood on the verge of a painful separation, not knowing what they would face ahead. After making the decision to divorce, Mrs. Linda seemed more determined than ever. She did not want to hear any reasons from Amy or Jack. In her heart, this decision was right and necessary for all three of them. However, she did not explain the cause of this decision, leaving both Amy and Jack feeling confused and lost. Amy could not accept that she would have to part with her beloved husband. She tried to find out the reason and wanted Mrs. Linda to explain further, but Mrs. Linda only said that this was good for all three of them and that there was no need to know the reason. Amy was hurt and angry, unable to understand why her mother-in-law despised her so much. Jack also tried to persuade his mother to withdraw the divorce demand, but Mrs. Linda refused. She said that everything was clear and they had no other choice. Jack was in pain, not knowing what to do to protect his marriage. He began to doubt if he had made any mistakes that caused his mother to lose faith in the happiness of their family. In the end, Amy and Jack had no choice but to accept Mrs. Linda's wishes. They agreed to divorce, even though they were unwilling and did not understand the reason. In Amy's heart, she still could not believe the reality she was facing. She thought her mother-in-law despised her just because she couldn't have children, which made her feel powerless and angry. On the day they signed the divorce papers, the atmosphere in the family was tense and filled with tears. Amy and Jack still loved each other, but they could no longer be together under the same roof. They hugged each other, cried, and said goodbye with regrets and pain, unable to accept the fate that was pushing them apart. After signing the divorce papers, Amy decided to leave the house she had once been attached to and loved. She did not want to stay there any longer, as everything reminded her of pain and humiliation. She moved in with a close friend and decided to start a new life. Amy tried to focus on her work and find joy in life. However, she could not erase the images of Jack and Mrs. Linda from her heart. With each passing day, Amy felt lonelier and more resentful. She constantly blamed herself for not being able to bring happiness to her family. Amy also incessantly blamed Mrs. Linda for deciding on the divorce without giving her a valid reason. She could not understand why her mother-in-law despised her so much, even though she had tried her best to be a dutiful daughter-in-law and a good wife. During this time, Amy tried to avoid any meetings and contact with her former in-laws. She did not want to face her pain and humiliation again. However, fate seemed to continue to mock her when Amy unexpectedly ran into Jack at a company party. This unexpected encounter left them both feeling awkward and unsure how to behave. Jack couldn't hide his happiness upon seeing Amy again, but he also couldn't forget the pain they had gone through. He noticed that Amy seemed more tired and sad than before. This made him worried and he wanted to find a way to help Amy. At the party, Jack tried to approach Amy and express his concern. However, Amy did not want to interact with Jack and coldly avoided him. She didn't want to open up to the man who used to be her husband, as feelings of resentment and pain still lingered in her heart. Afterward, Jack persistently tried to approach and take care of Amy. He hoped that he could help her overcome her pain and find happiness in life again. However, Amy still refused to open up and accept Jack's help. Time went on, and a year passed. Amy started to stabilize her emotions. She no longer blamed herself, and she became more optimistic and loved herself more. One day, while sorting through old belongings, she found an old envelope. Curious, she opened it and was astonished to find a letter from her former mother-in-law, Mrs. Linda. Her hands trembled as she opened the letter and read it. Tears fell as she read each word. "Amy, I know you will blame me a lot when you read this letter, but I hope you can understand. I never despised you. Since you became my daughter-in-law, I have loved you sincerely as if you were my own daughter. Because I loved you, I couldn't bear to see you living under the criticism of those around us. Not having children is not your fault but my son's. When Jack was little, he had mumps and complications. The doctor once told me that Jack could be infertile, but I didn't believe it. Over time, I gradually forgot about it. But unfortunately, it turned out to be true, and I was devastated. I forced you two to divorce, hoping that you could have a better, new life. In this bank card, there is $5,000, an amount I have saved over many years. I hope you will accept it as my way of making amends." Tears streamed down Amy's face, and she couldn't read any further. All she could do at that moment was cry, unable to think about anything else. After calming down, Amy decided to return the money to Mrs. Linda. Regardless of the truth, she didn't want to take the money. A few days later, Amy met with Mrs. Linda to talk and returned the bank card, firmly refusing to accept the money. She didn't understand why Mrs. Linda chose the most negative way to separate her and her husband, only to claim it was for her sake afterward. Indeed, she couldn't forgive Mrs. Linda. Amy had been in immense pain, blaming herself until she learned the truth, which now seemed laughable. Even knowing she wasn't infertile, Amy couldn't be happy. She felt like a pawn in her mother-in-law's game. Mrs. Linda heard her, then offered her a large sum of money as consolation. Amy met her ex-husband again, but this time Jack didn't try to approach her. Jack sat silently in deep thought, as if he didn't know how to start a conversation with her. Seeing Jack like that, Amy guessed he knew everything, and perhaps, after all, The most hurt person wasn't her, but Jack. He looked more gaunt than before. Unable to hold back her tears, Amy's emotions burst forth once more. Jack immediately embraced her, and they cried together. Perhaps their love story would continue, as their feelings for each other were deep and strong, or it could truly end at this moment, because when someone is deeply hurt, they don't want to return to where they were wounded or face the person who caused their pain. It's not about being unable to forgive, but rather being unable to trust again.